Thank you. We'll go to Mike 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's really great to be here with all of you, and I'd like to thank Squamish for allowing me into their beautiful territory. It's been a while since I've been around this table, and I appreciate the time and accommodation. I have to teach at the law school tonight, so they're fitting me in. So thank you, Sophie, for letting me get in front of you. As you know, I co-chair the Heritage Conservation Working Group, and we've been working on an action plan for the area as the chiefs have adopted in many other areas: fish, children and families, justice. We did a lot of action plans in our day, and we needed some direction to the working group that works directly with the province on trying to make progress in the area of heritage conservation. So in February, we were able to have a conference, and our technical staff had pulled together a discussion paper that was circulated before the conference. We had a lot of discussions, and we ranked a lot of the recommendations and took those, and we produced another paper, sent it out to the communities, got more input, and a third paper went out this summer. And what you have in front of you is the fourth draft of the action plan. So we've had input from a lot of chiefs, technical people, and community members on this action plan. So I'll really quickly walk you through the action plan, just so that you know the setup. So the executive summary is there. The context, giving you all the background of the legislation, and where we get into more of the details is on page 9. And that's the way forward. How do we deal with some of the issues that are vital and critical in our communities dealing with heritage conservation? And so we've set out vision and goals that we established through the community consultations and the papers that we were doing, and set that up as the areas that we're going to work in. You'll notice some of these goals will be enacted by leadership. Some of it will be community. But we wanted to be very clear that this working group is subject to the terms of reference of the Leadership Council and the working groups. This group does not do anything on behalf of communities, specific community issues, and that is up to each First Nation to look after their own issues, and we're really just at a higher level trying to change policies, help promote mechanisms and tools that First Nations can use. And so the goals are set out, and then there's a whole list of recommendations of actions that we can do. And of course, one of the main ones is building relationships, relationships with government, relationship with education in the school systems, real estate agents. We need to do a lot of education about how our heritage artifacts are dealt with in the sales and purchase of land. Legislation and policy. We all know that the Heritage Conservation Act is not a good one, and that in the long term we need to change that. And if it's a First Nations doing their own laws, that's a good thing. In the interim, we have to try and find ways to look at the long-term amendment of that act. We have been working very diligently at the working group to change some of the policies. We've had input on some of the policies, and the province has actually changed those. So if you go to their website, you can see some of those policies have been changed. Conservation and enforcement, of course, are areas that we see the government and the RCMP not really pushing. So we have people that are violating the Heritage Conservation Act and nothing happens. And so that's an area that we need to work on. Working with local governments and their land use planning, their official community plans. There's some actions there. Working with archaeological overview assessments, site alteration permits, using First Nations in the field. As you're aware, the Heritage Act allows for altering sites, and they just have to issue a permit. And so some of the tougher subjects that we're dealing with right now are things like, how does the province weigh up collective alteration permits? So let's take, for example, Site C, or some mine that there's a large number of heritage sites within that area. How does the government weigh those? In the Site C example, there's 334 recorded archaeological sites that will be destroyed if they go ahead. And how does the province look at weighing the social benefit versus the First Nations values? And so those are some of the tough topics that we're trying to tackle there. Or even, how does the government look at First Nations values? If you have a site in your territory and you don't want it touched, and how do they weigh how much you appreciate that site versus, you know, what they think that site is worth, and the development going ahead? So we're trying to have some of those tough discussions and trying to find ways around them, ways of acknowledging our need to use the archaeologists we want, using our First Nations in the field, just having those discussions. In the longer term, there's some greater projects that we need to deal with, and that's the education, knowledge gaps, the pilot project, looking at legislation that will work, mechanisms, encouraging the government. We see a lot of best practices, you know, one-offs that the government has entered into with First Nations, and can we encourage more of those kind of mechanisms for other First Nations to take advantage of? And so we've tried very hard to find all the issues and areas that First Nations would like us to look at and work on. And of course, communications with these tables, with the chiefs tables, with the Leadership Council, will continue in the work. We collected a lot of emails from the forum that we can send information out to on progress or when we need input on various issues that we have. But after a lot of hard work by our technical people, we have this draft action plan that we're looking for support for, and it will guide the work of the joint working group, which normally meets once a month with the province, so we can try and deal with some of these issues in the interim while you're working on the longer term solutions at treaty or other agreements that you've been negotiating.
Thank you. Just for your information, what was handed out was a two-page briefing note. The actual plan is with the resolution to be for your presentation. It's in the package. We have a resolution for your consideration on Resolution Day to support the First Nation Heritage Conservation Action Plan without infringement on nations. Would be the subject of the resolution.
Are there any questions?
Do you have any questions? Okay, thank you then for your presentation. Mike 12, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cliff Atleo, New Channel Tribal Council. I appreciate certainly the joint working group. I'm trying to figure out, I appreciate the pilot project approach, but more in particular, it's working with the Heritage Conservation Act and potential or possible or real amendments to accommodate our interests for a change?
That is certainly the goal of what we want to do. And so, we've been flagging those issues that need to be amended, and there'll be a whole process on how that will happen. In the interim, we've been doing some immediate solutions, such as revising policies, so that they can be done immediately, but definitely, just pulling together some issues, and there'll be a whole process that'll be put in place when we actually get into the long-term amendments to the Heritage Conservation Act.
So I'm trying to understand the Section 4 reference to that Conservation Act. Is this a piece of provincial legislation? And if so, I'm trying to understand the provincial legal opinion that Section 4 of that Conservation Act is not legally binding. I mean, like, what's the point?
That's one of the thorny issues that we're trying to work through. So Section 4 allows a First Nation to negotiate an agreement with the government that goes beyond what's in the Act. So for instance, the Act doesn't really protect sacred sites because sacred sites, normally you can't even detect that there's been use of that area. So in a Section 4 agreement, you can go beyond what's in the Act to protect. So what's important to First Nations. So the provincial government has a legal opinion that says that they don't think it's a valid section, because at one point it says that they can delegate the powers to a First Nation to be issuing permits. And that's where they have an issue. They don't really have an issue with the First Nations' management of their issues. It's, that one piece about delegation. And so at the working group level, we've been trying to figure out ways and solutions for the government to find this acceptable. And if we hit the roadblock on that, we're going to have to come back and find political direction on that. So I think, we'll keep you updated on those Section 4 agreements and where we're headed. And so the pilot project was going to be kind of finding a First Nation that would do a list of all their sites and finding ways of protecting the different types of sites, and then work on a Section 4 agreement. So we could kind of do it slowly, and the province could be, could figure out how this would happen. But that hasn't, we haven't got the pilot project off the ground yet.
Final point, Mr. Chairman, if I might, it would be useful to actually have that act amended to recognize the point that is made here in terms of our ability to apply our laws, because in the state of Washington and Wisconsin, they exercise their laws as it pertains to special areas and sites that we're talking about here. And down in Yakima, when there's activities in their forest that are adjacent or close by to special areas, whatever the designation might be, they just ribbon it off. And they actually have it mapped out, and they don't have to tell the activities what is ribboned off. But more than that, they actually have a very highly secure facility to house the mapping. And sometimes that mapping is for families only. And it's not an open. So that would be just a suggestion in terms of how we might tighten up this very loose piece of legislation as it pertains to our interests.
Thank you, Cliff. And we'll go to Mike 6. Grand Chief Stewart.
Just wants you to say about your resolution.
I'm not quite sure what we're doing here, but the UBCIC had our AGA last week up at Whistler, and this was one of the issues that we discussed and debated. Raised a lot of the same issues I'm hearing, but our chief saw fit to support the resolution as an interim measure to deal with these issues that are arising vis-a-vis developments and so on and so forth. We recognize it's not the you know, what we're looking for in terms of inherent jurisdiction, but certainly is better than what exists at the moment. And quite often these situations create the situation where we have to go out and protect our sites physically. So again, we did hear Judith's presentation and supported the resolution. Why? Lim.
Thank you, and we'll go to Mike 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wayne Edwards, Chief Negotiator for Snotnawas Nenus First Nation associated with the Tumble Treaty Association. I know I've had a lot of experience basically dealing with what you're dealing with, Judith. And the issue is something that we've been having to deal with since the creation of the Conservation Act in 1972. And the court case that I make reference to is Craig Bay, one of the biggest embarrassments to the province of British Columbia. It's cost them millions of dollars, and it's ongoing. But the issues that we're having to deal with, it's something that we talked about when we were trying to redraft, and the summit participated in the redrafting of the Heritage Conservation Act in the mid-1990s. But it was sterilization. And that they just remove all of the artifacts. And there was an issue then that the province basically said that a human remains after 50 years became an artifact. And we argued that, and it's something that Beecher Bay still argues today at our table about the kind of treatment that we're receiving in heritage conservation. The CMTs in our area where we had canoes carved still in the tree, they were cut down and gone. So, you know, they're no longer there. The issue of burials being removed, so that's all part of sterilization. And what they were arguing since Craig Bay is that if the artifacts, burials, CMTs are gone, there is no longer Aboriginal claim to that particular area. And it's an outstanding issue, and it's one that goes deep. So we're still trying to make it very expensive for the government to issue those permits. And those permits basically, you know, way back in 1995, I told the province of British Columbia that real estate was a buyer beware because of the fact that we had sites and burials, midden sites in our area, and burials that were in the ground. I'll cite one issue where a lady wanted to build a guest house in Parksville, and we told them that, you know, there's a problem with this particular area, and we've been saying that since 1972, and they found the remains of those little dogs that everybody used to have in our area, and it cost the lady somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 out of her own pocket. So those are the kind of issues that we're bringing forward now, is where the province wasn't paying. So now they're attaching that to the permit holder. The concern that I have, and I'd like to bring to your attention, is a comment made by Rafe Mayer on a radio station that he was hosting. And he basically said, if I find something in my backyard, I'm sure as hell not going to tell anybody about it. And that's a concern that we have, is that people are going to start hiding these things again. and we're going to go back in time to not knowing for certain what happens with these things. So when you have only partial burials being removed, and then they want to rebury so they can build a house on that site. And they were made aware that these particular sites contain burials. It's hard for me to understand why it's okay to remove the burials from the ground, put them 100 feet away from where they want to build their house so they can have a real nice view. So when you make reference to what's important, it's those issues that we're dealing with on a fairly regular basis. We had a surveyed reserve of 3,400 acres, and that reserve contained burials, and that's what we've been pointing out to the provincial government for many years now. And you know, when you have a reserve that's been reduced to 209 acres, it's pretty hard to convince them that you have any claim, and they keep digging up the remains of our people and the artifacts that are contained in those sites. So I support the work that you're doing. It's just that we've been doing it for such a long time that, you know, it's getting to the point where when is enough enough? And I had a conversation with, I don't know if I should mention what his name is, but anyway, we, you know, his village came to my village, and we stood on the line, you know, shoulder to shoulder, and you know, stopped a very large development, and you know, that was the only way that we were going to receive the justice that we require. So heritage conservation is something that's very important, and it's an outstanding issue for me. And I don't know if what you're trying to do is going to be able to accomplish anything unless it has total support of the leadership here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We'll go to Mike 5.
Thank you, Ray, and to Judith for the report, and hopefully that the action plan will receive the support from the chiefs here on Friday, and to take the comments from Wayne around the issue of burial sites, and it's nothing but desecration of these sites. That's what they call it. Or if you go somewhere else and you destroy somebody's sacred site, it's desecrating these sites. And you see in the Middle East wars that are fought over things like that. Yet here the government has this legislation really not designed to conserve heritage sites, but to find a way to destroy them through their approaches, as you talk about sterilization. I wanna suggest one thing that we look at and do together with the committee is to, and our legal counsel jointly with the union and BCAFN, is to begin to draft what we would see as legislation together with regulations and policies that would protect these areas. If these are important and sacred sites to our people, these are not government sites, these are not Crown sites, these are our sites, our people's sites. I don't know when they came to own them. I don't know when they came to own our graveyards. You know, it's none of their business to begin with. So I really think that we need to take those proactive steps, and one of the suggestions I would make is to begin that process of putting that together, one that we can start using and exercising. I know like the Gixan have developed policies in respect to oil and gas development in their territory. Certainly we can develop these kinds of policies that that receive cross First Nations support. And it's something that I would like to suggest that we table with the minister when we begin to re-engage in a new relationship, so that we take these proactive steps that would be designed to provide not just conservation but protection.
Thank you then. Say thank you to Judith for the report, and look forward to the progress that's coming and a resolution that'll be presented. Thank you then, Judith. We'll move on to hearing from the BCTC. Ask their